Happy Friday, guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Dubs. I'm your host, Bill T. Another Friday, another podcast that I'm bringing to you guys, and I hope you're stoked as I am because today we talk about some throwback OG EMPI collectibles. So Eric Lussier has been one of the guys in the scene forever. I remember him from the early 90s out there collecting VW parts and pieces. A lot of the EMPI stuff, he was one of the original Pomona, aisle hounds out there looking to shop and grab some deals and buy and resell and all that kind of stuff. And over the years, he amassed quite an EMPI collection. He shares a lot of stories as to how he came across a lot of this EMPI memorabilia and stuff like that. So, and if you're wondering who had the most expensive set of BRMs that were sold on the Samba, that would be him. So we do a deep dive on collecting and how he got into it and all the evolutions in and out of that. So excited for this podcast. I know you guys will dig it. But before we get into this, make sure you guys support our sponsors. Go to subscribe today at vwtrendsmagazine.com. Back on the scene after a long hiatus. VW Trends Magazine, a quarterly magazine that's coming out with a lot of how-tos and air-cooled and water-cooled stuff. So a real diverse quality of vehicles in the magazine. So go subscribe today at vwtrendsmagazine.com. And don't forget Ross Wolf, high quality aftermarket parts, bringing new stuff to the market for enthusiasts, by enthusiasts. You need some deck lid hinges. Buses by the Bridge is just around the corner. Get your raggedy deck lid laced up with some stainless steel deck lid hinges. If they're all worn out, blown out, these new stainless steel deck lid hinges, you can sand them, polish them, paint them, whatever you want to do, but they're indestructible. They'll last longer than the rest of your bus. And if you want something cool and you're doing kind of a throwback, old school, a little bit of an outlaw vibe, they've got their new heavy duty plug wires that are cloth wrapped, look like old school vintage wires, but they are a high quality silicone wire in the middle, and you should pre-order your sets today. So go to rosswolf.com and go get some eye candy for your engine and some good performance goodies. So lots of new stuff coming up with those guys, and we'll have them back on the podcast after a little bit, talk about some of the new products and pieces they're developing. So go check them out. Give them a follow at rosswolf42, I think it is, their Instagram. Look up rosswolf.com and go check them out today. So don't forget, if you haven't set up for this weekend, I know I'm reminding you, that's why I keep saying don't forget. I say don't forget too much, but we're going to work on that. Okay. So October 3rd through the 5th, one crazy weekend is happening in 2024. Make sure you go book your rooms now, man. The Orleans Hotel and Casino, great place, great rooms, a fabulous place to have a wonderful VW weekend. And the rooms are dirt diggity cheap. We're talking $40 for Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday and Saturday are $90 a night. You can't beat that with a bat anywhere. So go get your rooms booked today, because the block of rooms will sell out. So block your rooms today. You can register for the show now. And so get yourself all situated. You heard a few podcasts back, we discussed some concerns that somebody had, and we've addressed a bunch of that stuff for this next year coming up. So go get set up for that today. And if you want to support the podcast, go to letstalkdubs.com, click on the store tab, and pick up some merch to support your boy here. Other than that, you want a shot on the podcast, you guys can send me an email at bill@letstalkdubs. Give me some points of interest to talk about, something to discuss on the podcast. If I discuss it, we'll give you a shout out, as well as if you give us a 5-star review. Don't forget to leave your name in the 5-star review and share the podcast with your friends. I love when you guys share the podcast, because that's how we grow this thing organically. We've got a few thousand listeners that are listening all around the world, and you guys are the ones that have helped this grow. So keep sharing the podcast with all your friends that are into good, high quality VW talk, and we're going to get into it this week. So no more waiting. It's time to talk old school. It's time to talk EMPI collectibles, and we're going to do that with Eric Lussier on Let's Talk Dubs.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen. It's got everything that people who like the bug like.
Okay, everybody. So on today's show, I've got one of the OG guys from back in the day that used to be knee deep in collecting, was kind of getting into that EMPI thing before a lot of people were getting into it. And so on today's podcast, I've got Eric Lussier, and he's with Second Avenue Scooters now, but you would know him from, he probably has the record for the most expensive set of BRMs sold that everybody saw on the internet for quite a while. And I'm excited to welcome the podcast. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hey, so you and I have met in passing before, especially when I saw your pictures. I'm like, yeah, I've seen him a million times at Pomona and all that stuff. Cause back in the early days of doing Pomona and all those things, you were the guy that was out and about and always had the cool trick stuff for sale. The way that we start the podcast always is your VW story. How did you get into Volkswagens, and what's your VW story?
I got into Volkswagens at 14 years old. That was 1984. My father, there was a little VW repair shop just around the corner from where I live, and my father went up and purchased me a 1970 Squareback for $300 from a little shop called Jim's VW Service on the corner there of 34th Street and McDowell.
Yeah.
And that's how I got my first one. And that's kind of what got me down the road of Volkswagen.
And so 1984, you get this thing, you said you're 14 years old at the time when you get it?
Yeah.
And then, so it's a running, driving car. And do you get into like the customizing of it, or are you just keeping it stock, or what's the vibe when you get it?
Well, it runs for about 3 days, and yeah, and something happens and the motor locked up. So my dad took it back up to the guy and came back home with a 69 VW Squareback. And I'm not sure what transpired there, but I ended up with the 69 VW Squareback, and that was basically my first car. That was the first car I ever did much to. My dad was a car guy, hot rods, Harleys. Grew up with cars. Grew up doing all kinds of stuff like that. But me and him never did cars together, really. He did his thing, and he really didn't care much for the Volkswagens, and he really didn't show much interest in my car. So my friends came over, and we lowered it in the driveway. And, pulled springs, turned torsion bars. We did it old school in the driveway.
And so at the time when you get a Squareback, like you've already got buddies that are into VWs, and you're like, dude, I'm getting a Volkswagen.
Yeah, oh yeah. I had a lot of friends with Volkswagens.
Very cool. And then, so this is the 80s, and so it's like the height of, the cow look movement. I mean, they say cow look, but it's more the custom bug movement.
I'm going to say pre-cow look, because this is when 84. I mean, this is when chrome was evil. You got rid of all the chrome.
Right.
Even if you had a super early car, I mean, if you had a split window, it wasn't cool unless you put 8 spokes on it.
Right. And
you had to have the knockoff spinners. Bumpers had to be painted the color of the car. When one-piece windows were the thing. Dark window tint. Hugely loud stereos bumping as hard as you could. I mean, that was the look. Velour interiors. That was the look back in the 80s.
Yeah, and at that time, what's the scene? And I'm assuming this is in Phoenix at the time.
Yeah, this is the Phoenix scene, which we're just like California's next door neighbor. So you got to think, pretty much what was happening in California was pretty much what was happening here at the same exact time.
Yeah, and so you have this Squareback, and what's the final result of the Squareback? So you lower it, you just keep it, because on my first car I just kept smoothies, Porsche nipple hubcaps, and that was the extent of the wheel customization, because obviously we're just broke kids trying to get by.
Yeah.
And,
well, the first iteration was, my father was an electrician,
mm-hmm.
and he did some job for someone, and for payment he received a Porsche 914 that had been hit front and rear. And so the motor was good in it. And he assumed I could take the motor out of that and put it in my VW, which you couldn't, because it was a mid-engine and not a rear engine.
Right.
And what I ended up doing was I took the wheels. It had those wagon wheels on it. I don't know what they're called exactly, but they look like wagon wheels. They had spokes, but they were flat.
Right.
And we took those off and put those on my Squareback, because they were the same 4-lug pattern as my 69 Squareback. That was the first iteration of the car. Later, I owned the car for a long time. Later, by the time I got rid of the car, it had bug headlights welded in. I had bought a ragtop sliding sunroof section that had come out of a super early bus,
Yeah.
and we had narrowed and shortened it and put it in the roof. So I had a full sliding sunroof in this thing.
Oh, wow.
I had changed the doors with the 67 square back, so I had the earlier doors. Uh, when it left, it had 5 lug smoothies, Type 3 smoothies on it, and with hubcaps. So it was pretty stock looking, slammed, trying to make it look like a variant. It had the rear hatch off a variant. Um, my favorite car of the time, and this dates me as well, was Rinker Dinker Stinker, the square back that had the bus safari windows in it with the Landau top.
Yeah.
That was in the magazine, and I think it was a Kit Dean car. I'm not sure, but I think so. But it was the safari windows that sold me that I was going to eventually get the front section out of a bus, and we were gonna make that work. But the thing with Rinker Dinker Stinker is there are no actual photos of that car. So I mean, just the one photo. So nobody on earth knows if it had a bus dash. Only the people who saw it in person. Did it actually have a bus dash in it or not?
Right.
So that was the one thing, is like, how did they do that? How did they do those windows in that?
Yeah, it's crazy because you get a car like that, like the Rinker Dinker Stinker, and I as you said it, I Googled it real quick, and it's just like now I remember the car completely, and it's got kind of a modified bus dash in it with the Safaris, and it was super unique looking, and that was really the 80s all encompassed was just kind of like
one of my deathbed wishes, my holy grail wishes, is before I die to actually see the dash of the car, to see what that car, see it in person. That was always my favorite car.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
And there's like literally one photo of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to track that thing down, man, and try to see.
I hope someone does.
Look up the owner and get the build process on that thing, because it was a super wild looking car, So, yeah. Well, I'm gonna do a deep dive on that, dude. So you had big plans, what's funny is most people know you as like a preservationist.
Well, I was Type 3 Eric long before I was EMPI Eric.
Right.
We've all had a bunch of different nicknames our whole lives. Well, I was Type 3 Eric, and then I was EMPI Eric later. When I got rid of the squareback, the last thing we had done was I had, we're talking pre-internet now.
Yeah.
I had tracked down a right-hand drive dash and pedal assembly out of Australia, and I had it shipped, and I had it put in the car. I never drove it as a right-hand drive.
Really?
The bodywork was done. Yeah, the bodywork on the car was mostly finished. The dash was welded in and mostly done. I had never installed the pedal assembly yet. And then I ended up selling the car. I moved on and ended up selling the car. I hear it's up in Flagstaff. I sold it to a gentleman by the name of Dante, if that helps. And I hear it's up in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I hear he still owns it, and I hear it's never been touched since he bought it for me. So if somebody's looking for it, I believe it's up there somewhere.
So when you sold it, it wasn't running and driving, or you just finished it and kind of got it just barely together?
It wasn't running and driving with the right-hand drive. I had never finished doing all that conversion. The dash was welded in, but we hadn't changed over the steering or anything else. Nothing else had been mechanically done. Yeah,
I think that's kind of the kiss of death for some of those cars, because it's like I remember there's a car here, a Ghia that I bought that a friend of mine built, and then he was like, it started as we're just going to repaint it project. Then it turned into like a full-on right-hand drive conversion, and then it just never got finished. And then I bought it like 10 years later off of Craigslist, and then I sold it to a guy. He was going to finish it. He never finished it. So and it's like it just never gets. Everybody's got the gumption to get to it until it comes time to just get it buttoned up. So you're hardcore in Type 3s. And my brother George was in a Type 3s. Hardcore. He had the black square back. He took first at like the 93 Jamboree in the Classic, and it was a black square back with a full length wood slat, white roof, and fully polished 2-liter alloys.
I remember the car.
And I remember he sold it. He daily drove that car in construction, and it had an immaculate paint job, and he thought he had cut a fat hog selling that thing at Pomona for $6,500.
Oh yeah.
And it got shipped off to Japan. And it's like,
Yeah, oh yeah, but I remember back then when the Japanese were buying everything.
yeah, every car was kind of like, hey, what happened to your car? Like, oh, I was at Pomona. The Japanese guys came up to me and they just offer me 10 grand. And everybody's just at the time, 10 grand might as well have been $1 million.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh, we all, I remember walking Pomona looking at 356 Porsches, and I remember seeing $3,500 price tags going, man, I can never afford that car.
Right. And so getting into the hobby, you start as kind of a type 3 guy. And type 3 guys, what's funny is I think when you start as a type 3 guy, you're on, I don't want to say you're in the fringe of the hobby, but you're not a bug guy. Like you're into something,
Yeah.
you're always into something that's a little different. It's a little unique. The type 3 guys all stick together. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of that whole thing. And then it kind of sets the tone for your hobby, right? Like you like stuff that's different. You don't want something that everybody has that's the same.
I'll tell you the funniest story of driving a Type 3 from day one. We used to cruise Central. Everybody used to cruise back in the 70s and the 80s, and we used to cruise our Central Avenue here, and a guy in I want to say it was seafoam green. I want to say it was an 11 window deluxe or a 13 window deluxe, slammed on Porsche alloys.
Yeah.
And it's he in the bus, he pulls up next to me, and I'm in my primered squareback, and I'm cruising Central, and this guy pulls up in his bus, and he seriously slides his window back, and looks over at me, and he says, "I'll trade you my bus for your squareback right now." And I looked over and I went, "Dude, nobody wants buses," and drove on. And I'll never forget saying that, because now that's all I have is buses.
Yeah, no thanks, bus loser. I'm driving a Type 3. Like, who wants a bus?
Yeah, nobody wanted a bus back then. They weren't cool.
Well, what was funny is, like, I remember having a bus that I ended up getting a bus in a trade, and it was black and white, and it was a 11 window and stock height, and the bulkhead had been cut out. I'm driving the thing around. I'm like, man, this thing's a loaf, dude. It's hard. It's not fast. It's nothing. And it was one of those things where I drove it around. It was kind of a novelty for a minute. And then I'm like, yeah, I got to dump this thing and get rid of it, because who really wants a bus, It's,
Yep.
It's funny how the dynamic of the hobby changes, But now, bringing up the fact that you were into Type 3s and kind of into something a little bit different, what possesses you to sell the squareback, and what's the next project you go to after that? And do you start getting into collecting stuff at this point? Because obviously, as a Type 3 guy, parts are hard to find, and I think that's naturally kicks off Type 3 guys really being big collectors,
Yeah, I went, it's funny. I went from that to a 58 ragtop bug. That was the first car after the squareback, and then that, quickly became too much of a project, and I ended up with a 63 ragtop bug.
Yeah.
Bought it from a friend. He had purchased it, and I had bought it from him because I needed transportation desperately. I had no running car at the time, and I just needed a car. So I ended up with this 63 ragtop bug, and that became the EMPI car. And that, since then I've had just insane numbers of cars, all over the place, lots and lots of cars, a lot of VWs.
Yeah.
And, that one car, it started out with I made it myself on the sewing machine at home. I made a tartan plaid sunroof cover for the ragtop.
Nice.
And, it wasn't anything special. It was like a dove blue color, and I two-toned it white. And it wasn't anything special. It looked like every two-tone car with white walls at the time.
Right.
There was nothing special about it. And it slowly morphed into the EMPI car that I had, little at a time.
Now, because people that know your name because of a lot of the collectible stuff that you've been selling, and tons and tons of NOS stuff. How do you start? What's the thing that you think just triggers this pursuit that you had, just to start collecting all kinds of cool early, performance stuff?
Well, you start, in the early days, friends of mine we're going to the Classic. We're going to the VW Classic, which used to be the big deal, the big show.
Right.
And so, we'd all pile in our quote unquote Cowlook bugs, and our cars, and we'd all drive to California for the Classic every year. Again, we're next door. We're only 5 hours drive.
Right.
So me and 3 or 4 friends in high school, we all go, and these shows changed your life. You got to finally see the cars you saw in the magazines, and then swap meet. And that's where it starts. Is you're looking for parts for your car, and there's a swap meet. Here at home, we have Bugorama,
Right.
but we don't have the stuff you have in California. So, we go and we're in the swap meet, and the things that are the cool things, we can't afford. We're teenagers. We can't afford this stuff. We have part-time jobs, and you can't afford a roof rack, and you can't afford, a wood slat roof rack, and you can't afford all those accessories. These guys are coming over from Europe. The European guys are coming over and opening suitcases at the swap meet, and they're selling like stuff you've never seen before, like the coolest of everything.
Right.
And that's what it's like, wow, I want that stuff, but I can't afford that stuff. So I've got to figure out a way that I can buy these things because I really want them. So, if you've got a little bit of ingenuity in you, and you got a little bit of hustle, you could figure a way to buy this stuff. And that's what we did. I had family in Pennsylvania. So, every year, every other year, we'd go home and see grandma and grandpa, go back and visit my aunts and uncles. You go for a funeral, you go for a wedding, and there's junkyards everywhere back east because cars rusted out. Where they didn't rust out here. So, you didn't find too many cars, here, but you found lots there. So on a vacation, I'd get my uncle to drive me over to the VW junkyard, and, I'd go out there, and you could find some cool stuff on cars you didn't see out here because, they weren't being picked over there like they were here. So you'd find an under dash tray, or you'd find a wood slat roof rack, and they would sell it for a reasonable price to you. So that kind of started the whole swap meet thing for us. I've realized I could go there, spend $100, and come home with a whole lot of parts, and then you'd find cars with semaphores, and you'd say, hey, how much for the semaphores? And they'd sell them to you for nothing. You'd bring them back here. I don't have a semaphore car, but I could sell them for a lot of money at the swap meet in California. And then that money would allow me to go buy those parts and accessories that I couldn't afford.
Right.
So, and that's kind of what happened is, we realized that there was a lot of it back east, but there wasn't much of it left out here that wasn't already picked over. So we would all pile in the car to go visit my family, and it started with me, Matt Howard, and Charlie Cooper. The three of us got in Charlie Cooper's mom's Thunderbird, drove 27 hours to Pennsylvania.
No way.
To spend a week with my grandparents, and we ended up renting a little U-Haul trailer to come home because we had bought so much stuff. And we went to the swap meets and sold the parts, and then turned around and split the money 3 ways, and then took the money and went and bought parts for our cars, accessories, for our cars.
Yeah.
And that's it. It ballooned over the years. So what started out as Charlie Cooper's mom's, Thunderbird, turned out, I had met a girl, and we started dating, and she happened to end up getting a job at a budget rent-a-car, and
bonus.
they ended up buying Cruise America. So what happened was they had these motorhomes back east that had too many miles on them, and they were paying a third-party company to drive them back here to Arizona, where their headquarters was, so they could re-chassis them or fix them up and then sell them as used.
Right.
So we inquired, well, would you pay us to drive one back? And not only would they pay us to drive it back, they would pay for the gas.
Oh, wow.
So we would fly one way with all our tools and pick up a motorhome in Ohio, and then we would just see my family for a day or two, and then junkyard to junkyard to junkyard. This is all, again, before the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And do one junkyard after another junkyard after another junkyard, and just, what started out as just hand tools. Before it ended many years later, we had battery operated sawzalls, and we were cutting sunroof sections out of cars. I remember one junkyard, we cut 3 bus sunroofs out, at the window posts all the way around.
Yeah.
And we were strapping this shit to the top of the motorhome with tie downs. I mean, and the goal was fill the motorhome up to where you had nowhere left to sleep in it, and then you'd have to come home.
Yeah. No, I
And
mean,
that's what we did that for many years.
the funniest part is like, the adventure of doing all that stuff starts because you don't have the resources, you don't have the money, so you try to figure out a
Yeah.
hustle, and then you end up figuring out like, oh, I wonder who drives those things back. Maybe we could drive them back, and then just that in and of itself, it's like having the access to money that you don't have to fly all over the place and buy stuff, but now
Yeah.
it's kind of, you're doing it while you're doing something else. You're essentially getting paid to go junkyard hopping. And
Well, I'm taking my vacation from work.
that's crazy.
And I'm, and I'm inviting friends, and the cast of friends changed every few times. There was always me and Matt Howard. Eventually Bill Bailey jumped in on that with us,
Yeah.
and the cast of friends changed depending on who had time off, and who had a car, and what we all wanted to get out of it, and it was fabulous. I mean, some of the stuff we found. We walked into VW shops that hadn't been in business since the 70s, and we were cleaning out shelves of NOS parts. It was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And at this time, like the EMPI thing, because at first it's like get semaphores, get rag tops, get the obvious stuff that's rare.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Heart taillights, whatever you can find.
And then the EMPI thing starts to gain traction and what's funny is like early 80s, all the EMPI stuff got sold out from someone to a guy that I know, and it really wasn't worth anything at the time. And then you go 10 years later in the 90s, like mid 90s, all of a sudden there's this EMPI resurgence. And I think it starts with guys like you that found really trick stuff that nobody else has. And you're like, well, screw it. I'm building a whole EMPI bug, right? Like you just start putting stuff on the bug.
For me, it started with a little VW junkyard repair shop in Pennsylvania. We walked in and he had 2 EMPI wood steering wheels hanging from the rafters in the barn. And that was the first EMPI thing I ever got. Me and Matt Howard each got one of those steering wheels.
Now,
and that was the first thing.
Is that the wheel that's still in his champagne colored car?
Yes.
That's so cool.
Matt has sold not a single thing. He has held. He's the last of the holdouts. He hasn't sold a single thing.
No, I know. When I met Matt, so I met Matt through Buddy, and I remember going to Matt's house. Gosh, this has got to be 20 years ago. And I'm there. This is when he first had his Chrysler, the 300 that he custom painted. And I'm over his house, and I'm like, dude, that's a freaking rad bus. Oh, you got this bug. You got this. I'm like, dude, you got all this stuff. And it was like, threw me for a complete curveball because at the time I just know him for doing custom paint. And then I realized like, oh, bro, this guy's one of the scavengers, bro, that was out there in the early days just snatching
He got
up.
that bus. He got that 21 window bus in Sierra Vista, Arizona, down by the border. And he got that for, and I don't quote me exact, but I know he bought that bus for less than $2,000.
It's insane.
I mean, that was, you got to remember back then, this stuff was so cheap. This stuff was so crazy cheap.
Yeah, it's just, but the key component is like, how do you know the stuff is rare and early, and then you see the EMPI stuff. So now it's like, cool, we got these cool EMPI wheels. What other EMPI stuff can we find? Like, do you guys find a catalog? Do you start looking like, oh, look, they made this, this, and this. I'm starting to put stuff on your radar.
We walked into a shop in Ohio, and I remember going, you'd find EMPI parts in cars, but I remember walking into the shop in Ohio, and he must have been an EMPI dealer at some point because there was boxes of unopened EMPI, like glove box pulls and dash pads, padded dashes, dash, and wood grain stuff, and just tons of it. And we made a deal to buy it all from him, and we ended up buying it all. I remember that I had at one point I had a box of like 100 and something glove box pulls, NOS on the card. And I remember the Japanese came up to me. It was the guy who owns Flat 4. I'm sorry, I can't remember names, but the guy who owns Flat 4. And he comes up and he wants this whole box. And I'm like, nah, I can't sell you all of them. So he's trying to negotiate the price really down. If I buy them all, kind of thing.
Right.
And and then it's kind of how the whole MP thing really started, was finding the stuff in places back east that, still had it. It didn't sell. And at the time, MP was the only people that liked MP at the time were all the original Cowlook guys, were the DKP guys, and the guys who were the generation before me.
Right.
These guys were the ones who had it, but they didn't have it because it was MP. They had it because that was the performance stuff that was from the 70s.
Yeah.
And their cars were that style. And that was the original DKP guys, not the newer group. But yeah, so they were the only ones that who had that stuff before we started finding a lot of it. And then it just kind of exploded. I had bought my first set of BRMs from a guy by the name of London, and it was in Lake Havasu, and I had to drive to Havasu, and I remember walking into this guy's garage, and this was right in the beginning of when wakeboarding was starting to get like super popular.
Right.
And this guy wanted to buy a new boat or something to do. It had something to do with wakeboarding, and he had these huge, like, topographical maps of the lake all the way around his garage. And then I remember there were like 7 or 8 Snap-on toolboxes down one wall, and I'm just thinking to myself, good Lord, who can afford that many toolboxes?
Right.
Yeah. And so in the middle of the garage, he's got a white 67 Cowlook Bug, DKP style Cowlook.
Yeah.
And it's sitting on a set of BRMs. And he says, I'm selling the BRMs. And I said, well, that's why I drove there. And I said, well, what do you got to get out of them? And we negotiated them to $400.
Wow.
And I ended up buying all 4 of them for $400 from the guy. And those are the wheels I ended up selling. Those are my only set. And I ended up selling those for, as just an absolute insane amount of money.
And those wheels were like practically new, like unmolested.
They had never been polished ever. They had the original caps. They were just pristine wheels. Not a crack, nothing wrong ever with them. And I was scared to death to break them. So, it took me forever to come up with all the sleeves and all the step studs, the original step studs and all the sleeves and all the original hardware to put them on my car when I finally did. But man, I was scared to death when they were putting the tires on them. I just everything. They never held air either. That was another problem. Unless you put tubes in them, they're porous and they just do not hold air.
Right. Well, what's interesting is to get that holy grail set of wheels. And at the time you buy them, what year is this that you buy those wheels?
I was 90, I want to say 92, 94, somewhere in there.
Yeah. So at that time, BRMs, the reproductions are starting to come out. And
yeah. And I remember one of the most disheartening things for me was people walking up to my car with them on my car going, oh, he's got the new flat fours. And it just made your heart sink. It's like it was your holy grail and you worked so hard to get them. And I had to borrow the $400 to buy them originally. And the spare I bought from an original member of DKP, like the first DKP, I bought the spare from him and it had been welded. It wasn't a perfect wheel at all. And, I paid probably $600 for just the spare, more than I paid for the other 4 at the time.
Yeah.
And
it's funny because, I have a set of BRMs on my chop top and I had 1 or 2 of them off and they're all welded on the back. Like they've been welded, and that was just kind of the thing that people did to them back in those days. You know what I mean? Like they just get a crack and they just weld them up. But it's insane how these wheels and all this stuff starts cranking up in value, and at the time when they're out and they're new and they're the hot thing, they're not really like the people that wanted the BRMs were they weren't like the newest coolest thing, because first they were 5 lug, and second, everybody obviously the hot thing was when those wheels came out was to convert your car to 4 lug and do the 8 spokes, because those
well, they were drag racing wheels. That's what you got to remember is only the guys who were racing wanted those wheels.
Well, yeah, that's what I was getting at is the select people that wanted those wheels for what they were valued for, because it was because they're lightweight and they can race.
Yeah.
then it's, then it's a good thing. So it's one of those things where the wheels come, and there's a little bit of a mystery on like when the BRM came out, because they're saying it kind of came out in 66, late 66, which 67 is the last year for wide 5 lug, and they're trying to quantify how many sets are still out there today. But those being as rare as they are, I think that the second wheel that was about as rare as those, or maybe even more rare as far as how many you could find, was the Cosmic, the 5-lug Porsche pattern Cosmic. And
I'm gonna object to that and say it's the American Racing Wide 5 for VW, the magnesium ones.
Oh yeah, like the D spokes.
Yeah, they're absolutely probably one of the rarest magnesium wheels for Volkswagen, because they're so hard to find. You'll find BRMs all day. You'll never find those things.
Right. No, that's a good point.
I walked up on a set of those at the little tiny community college flea market we had here, in the boxes. Nobody wanted them, and the guy wanted $1,100, and everybody was like saying, this guy's out of his mind. He'll never get that. And I wanted them so bad, and I had no money. I had nothing to sell at the time that I could turn into buying those wheels. I have no idea where they ended up, but I at least got to see them in the boxes at a swap meet.
Now, when you start collecting and you start going down the road of like, okay, I got the EMPI wheel, I'm getting the door pulls, got the glove box pull, you have your standard kind of stuff. And as you go through their catalogs year by year, there are certain years where they had stuff that was in the catalog and then you never see it again. What for you are some of the coolest pieces that you've owned, or is there any piece that you've owned that you had no idea how unique it was and you just let it go, and in hindsight you would have kept it?
That's a tough one. I think some of my favorite stuff was the early Swedish gauges with the bubble glass. I think those are just, they just drip with style. Where the later 70s gauges they're cool, but they're not bubble glass cool.
Right.
I don't know. That's one of my favorite things. I mean, probably the rarest stuff I ever had was I had one of the fiberglass racing hoods that was still in gray gel coat that hadn't been painted.
Oh, really?
That had with the tack mount out on the outside, the same hood that's on the Lightning Bug, basically. So they made 2 styles of that same hood. They made a street version, which was a thicker, heavier fiberglass, and then they made a racing version, which was paper thin. I had a racing version, and I'm trying to remember. I think I bought it from Troy Palmer. By the way, Troy Palmer was the first guy I met that was really into EMPI other than me and Matt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we, him and his dad were really into it. They racing though. They were racers, so they were into racing, and then it kind of morphed into him building a street car. And so he was like the first guy I met who was into EMPI as much as me and Matt.
Yeah, because the EMPI thing, it wasn't until later, and I'm trying to think of the year that I think it's Scott Black's car came out. I think it was Scott. Is it Scott Black or no? Scott Smith. Scott Smith is his name. It was a black '67 that was in the VW magazine in Hot VWs, and it was the feature was called Lone Wolf, and he had like every EMPI accessory on there. You know what I mean? Like everything, the 2-piece 5-spokes, and then I think later he has. I think one of the photographs he's got BRMs, but they may be reproduction BRMs in the photograph, but. It was like it come to a head where it was like finally when somebody finally starts getting all the parts and pieces, then they just start reproducing that stuff like crazy, Yeah,
I think it's a supply and demand issue,
Yeah, well, once they see like people are willing to pay, $1,500 for a set of wheels, they're like, wait a second, maybe we have something here, and then they come out with the BRM knockoffs,
Yeah.
Now you had. So the last set that you sold for quite a bit of money, that's the same set that you bought in Lake Havasu.
That's the only set. Well, not the only set I had. I had several other wheels come through here, but that was the only set. That was my first set and the set I kept. And then I sold it because I'm trying to restore this camper. And as we all know, campers are like the most expensive, hardest, impossible restoration to ever finish. Right. And I needed money to basically, I'm never going to own a Bug again. I have sold all my VW Bugs. I only have buses now. And, I'm not going to put BRMs on a bus. That's obviously asking for, an exploded wheel.
Right.
So I ended up selling them just so I could put all the money into the camper, more or less.
Now you're telling me a little about the camper earlier. What's
Yeah.
the story on the camper? What year and what's the details on the camper?
So it's a super early 1961 SO34 flip seat subhatch, and it just happens to be the bus that was used in the movie Forrest Gump. The actual bus that's on screen for about 30 seconds when you watch the film.
Really?
Yeah, and the backstory on the bus is it's because I over a period of time tracked down the guy who owned it during filming. I got it from a local body shop owner who took it in on payment for doing work on another bus for Douglas Denlinger, who I don't know. He bought it from the guy who owned it during the filming, and so I actually traded a 1955 Series 62 two-door coupe Cadillac for the camper.
Really?
Straight trade.
Wow.
Yeah, and the Cadillac was I was third owner. Cadillac was an original Tucson car, had zero rust. It was original paint, turquoise and white. It was lowered, and I had done the interior, and I had the motor and tranny rebuilt, and I mean it was a daily driving car, and I ended up trading it straight across for a complete stripped project camper.
Now,
So that and that should tell you.
yeah. Now, how did the bus get from a running driving bus to just completely stripped down?
So the original owner found it in a farmer's field in Tennessee, and he had a friend who had the same bus, and so basically together they were fixing up these two campers, and during the filming of Forrest Gump, they approached him because they needed a VW bus that was period correct for that point in the movie where they were filming. So it had to be pre-1962 or pre-1963, I believe. And this was the only bus they could find. So what they did was, in lieu of paying them to use the bus for the film, they offered to fix all the bodywork, repair the rust, and paint the bus so they could use it in the movie. So they filled all the rust with chicken wire and styrofoam.
Oh, wow.
And just newspapered over it, and then painted the bus. They didn't actually properly repair anything, and then they filmed. He told me there was a total of 8 minutes on film with the bus, and that none of the actors could drive a stick shift. So they put him in hippie clothing, and they had him drive the bus during all the film shots. And then I guess what happened was the Screen Actors Guild found out that he wasn't actually part of the union.
Yeah.
And they were forced to cut all the scenes with him driving the bus and all the driving scenes in the bus. So what was left was 30 seconds of film where Jenny is saying goodbye to Forrest and climbs in the bus with the hippies, and then it drives off. And that's all you see of the bus in the film. It's literally 30 seconds on screen.
Well, that's crazy. And then how do you know it's that bus?
So I have the original title because fortunately when Doug Denlinger had made the deal to buy the bus, he never changed the title over. So I had contacted the original owner because I looked his name up, and I used Facebook to track him down, and anybody who had that name I messaged.
Right.
He eventually messaged me back, and we started talking, and I told him, look, I'm restoring it, and I own it now. And so we started talking about it, and then so he sent me an entire album of photos taken on set with the bus. So I have that, and then he sent me all the paperwork showing the bus was used in the film. So there's actually formal paperwork with the movie studio name on the paperwork and everything, talking about using it and the VIN number matches. And I have the original title, his title. I have the original title, which I paid to keep as a souvenir title.
Right.
So I have all of this paperwork proving the bus was actually used in the movie.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, the bus in and of itself is valuable because of the subhatch and the flip seat.
Because of what it is, yeah.
Right, but the fact that
it's in a movie bus, but not just any movie bus, but a but a humongous movie. Yeah. So I estimate it, if I were to ever not be able to drive it and have to sell it. I would estimate it's worth twice its value because of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, especially being a movie collectible and it being a bus,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like to
Yeah.
actually have most things in movies are props, and to have an actual prop that you could drive.
You can drive and camp, and it's,
But how
so
did
Doug,
so how did it end up getting
so,
stripped?
so, well, here's the thing. I have photos of it from filming and after filming, and it's got some of the cabinetry in it still. And it had the toilet, and it had the water bottles in all the photos that I have, and some of the other, interior. The seats had been recovered, which I later found out the owner during the film, his father had recovered the seats for him. So when Doug got it, I don't know if you know who Doug Denlinger is, but
I don't.
Doug goes way back into the 80s as well with VWs. But Doug's claim to VW fame is he's the guy who started buying buses and restoring them and then selling them at the auctions. He's the first person to ever sell a bus for $100,000 at an auction.
Oh, really?
So a lot of people actually, in the beginning, this was in the 90s, a lot of people blamed him for making buses and VWs unaffordable for the rest of us. And he got a lot of flack and pushback, blowback on that.
Right.
But he was restoring these, farming out a lot of the work, doing a lot of it himself at his home, and just doing the best he could, hiring everybody and anybody to help do body work and build motors, and just to get these buses restored. So when he bought this one, he was excited because it was a movie bus. He was going to restore it and keep it, but then a tree fell in his backyard onto the bus and damaged the roof, and I think that's what kind of pushed him to not want to bother chasing it any longer.
Right.
About the same time, he got a SO23 for a customer to restore, and not knowing much about the differences in the campers, Doug stripped this bus to use the parts for the other restoration. And from what I understand, he still has all of these parts because he's never finished the restoration on the other bus. But from what I understand, he still has most of this interior, or whatever he took out of it. He still has most of it, and I've been trying to get it for several years from him. But in the meantime, I don't want to wait, so I've just been buying what I can find.
So does he live? He lives out. Where does he live in Arizona?
He has multiple properties here in Scottsdale and Tempe and the surrounding outside areas of Phoenix. He's really not into VWs much anymore. He's now into hot air ballooning.
Oh, really?
So he does mostly hot, yeah, and he's been selling off his collection of really rare buses, by the way. He had a lot of original sign paint stuff and a lot of original, buses that were commercial buses. A lot of 21 and 23 window stuff. But he's been selling off all of his stuff. He sold his 356 Porsche quite a while ago, and he had a Messerschmitt car he sold a while ago.
Interesting.
So yeah,
But it's crazy how the hobby just goes in those cycles where, you've got people that are super into it, and then after a while they're just no longer into it, and they're
people's lives change. They have families. They have families and kids, and your priorities change.
Yeah.
So
that's so you then you start having all these EMPI. You have all this EMPI stuff. You're at the swap meet all the time. You're buying, selling, and all the while you're still a bus guy, so you're always on the lookout for bus stuff. Now, do you still have any buses?
I have 3. Currently 3 and a Vespa car.
A Vespa car?
A Vespa 400, yeah, a little 2-cylinder clown car.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. And what are the buses that you have?
So I have a 1959 single cab that I purchased in 1990 along with a friend of mine, Bill Bailey. And we used it for our swap meet business, for selling the parts out at all the swap meets. If you went to Pomona, you saw it there every Pomona for almost 10 years in the same spot. So we bought that from a little VW repair shop. It was a Porsche VW shop, opened in 1963, went out of business in 1990, I want to say 94, 93, 94, went out of business. We bought the bus from them in 1990 for $1,500, running, driving. And I eventually went back and bought out the entire shop when they went out of business, and bought everything in the building, all the tools, all the machines, all their inventory, all the Porsche parts. Ended up buying everything they had.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And
And I still have that. And that if you've been to Phoenix, you've seen it driving around because it's been my daily driver since I got it. It's been my main mode of transportation almost since then.
your single cab.
My single cab. Yeah, I still drive it almost every other day.
And what motor's in it?
It's on its, third, fourth motor somewhere in there. It's got a 1776 with dual Delortos.
Wow,
Behind a 12-volt transmission with big nut transmission with freeway gearing in it.
is there any lettering on the single cab?
Oh, it's all logoed up. It's logoed up for my current business, which is vintage scooter Vespa Lambretta restoration business.
And then how do you make the jump where you go from Volkswagens to Vespas?
I think they kind of go hand in hand, really. I mean, about the time that I've always been into vintage scooters, but about the time that Volkswagen started getting expensive, vintage scooters never did really until recently.
Mm-hmm.
And you could still buy vintage scooters for still cheap, like we used to be able to buy Volkswagen super cheap. So the hobby, it was a hobby, just like Volkswagens. And then when the economy tanked, back in 1999, I believe when the economy went, in the bubble burst,
Right.
I found myself unemployed, and I found myself looking for jobs. And unfortunately, being a painter and a body man working at custom shops, I couldn't find a shop, that was hiring. Nobody would hire me. I couldn't find work. So it was either go to Home Depot and get a job stocking shelves, or take money out of the bank and, try to turn a hobby into a business. And at the time, we didn't have any scooter repair or restoration places here any longer. The last guy with famous, everybody, if you're into scooters, you remember Bob Darnell and Classic Vespa. And he had packed up and moved off to Texas, and left town and moved off to Texas, leaving this huge void locally with tons of restored Vespa owners with nowhere to have their scooters serviced. So I kind of overnight started repairing scooters and painting scooters because there was no work out there. And that was an avenue to keep the bills paid and fill a niche void.
Yeah, it's crazy how, there's something that seems to be such a niche, but it's enough to where it provides a living for somebody because there's enough
for one
work.
person. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like a crazy hobby that there's 50 million people into it, but the people that are into it are it's like the VW hobby. They're really into the hobby.
You find that a lot of the guys who own the scooters also own VWs. You end up finding it. They're the same guys.
Well, yeah, nothing be cooler than the back of a single cab or double cab. See a Vespa on the back of it.
Yeah. So the second bus I have is a 63 panel delivery walkthrough.
No, and those are not super common.
And I bought that, believe it or not, from an Arizona State University student in 1996. Had a bad transmission, and I got it for $500.
Wow.
I eventually wanted to go to Bad Comberg in about 1999, and to get the funds to do the Comberg trip, I sold it to a friend of mine. Many years later, that friend, he had diabetes, and unfortunately he had passed away from diabetes. And his family contacted me, and he was a VW guy too, and he had a lot of VWs, and they asked if I would come help clean their property up and get rid of, a dozen VWs and all the parts that he had. And so I helped him sell it all, and then use the money to, gave them the money or use the money to buy his headstone for them. And then, when I came, when it came to the bus, it was still sitting there, and it's still in my name.
Oh, wow.
And I went to his parents and I asked if I could buy it back. And I basically bought it back for what I sold it for. And, started to restore it all over again from the first time because it had been sitting for a long time out on the Indian reservation.
That's crazy.
So I'm still working on it. I'm just right at the end of it being finished with it.
And what year is that panel?
63.
So 63 panel delivery walkthrough.
Yep. no logos. It's seafoam green. Um, it's completely lowered now, and it's got full 356 Porsche running gear underneath it, B brakes, uh, Porsche date stamped wheels, and it's got the fake Rudge knockoff centers on it, so it makes it look like it has Rudge wheels.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, kind of old school look.
Yeah.
I thought about putting those new Assault Flats race wheels on it with the kidney bean cutouts because I really like the way they look, but old school won out.
Yeah. No, that's right. And then the third bus you have?
Third bus is the 61 camper. So I've got the 59, the 63, and the 61.
That's cool. Yeah, that's well, and so you're still in the hobby as an enthusiast, but no longer dealing in hunting and chasing parts to kind of make a living,
No.
right?
A few years. Well, I still have some of the EMPI stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, I still had lots of like new old stock split window and early oval stuff. I still had like tons of NOS parts from all of our trips, lots of generator windings and boxes and things that aren't exciting, but they're fun because they're NOS.
Right.
I had at one point, I had a bunch of Type 3 NOS stuff, including a fuel injection harness in the box.
Oh, wow.
I mean, bay window bus, NOS rubber, stuff that really wasn't exciting, that nobody got crazy about, but it was still NOS and it was still kind of neat.
Yeah.
But I had a shed full, I still had about $10,000 worth of NOS stuff. And I eventually just put an ad up on the Samba and I said, someone come and give me $5,000 and just take it. Cause I'm not going to swap meets anymore. It's my time has become so valuable that, spending the day at the swap meet to make $400 wasn't worth all the extra effort to drag it back and forth and set up for hours to make a nice setup. So I ended up just selling it off, to a local VW shop. Actually bought it all.
Oh, that's good. It went, it stayed local.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But the EMPI stuff, I sold that piecemeal here and there to pay for camper stuff, and I still have some of it. A lot of it I took over to Matt at Deluxe, and I offered it to him, for friend prices.
Right.
I gave him my eliminator shifter, basically let him have it for his pink bug.
Yeah.
And a couple things he took, and I still have a full set of gauges with the tack, and I still have all the steering wheels pretty much.
Now, of all the steering wheels, how many wheels did EMPI make total?
Wow, they made dozens of different wheels, and then they carried wheels that other people made and just rebadged them.
Right. So, because, I just recently picked up an EMPI, a GTV bug in 1971, and I've got that one. It's got one of those Riverside 500 steering wheels in it. And
those are pretty rare. Those are fun.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, the car was originally purchased in Ohio or somewhere like that. I think it was Milwaukee, in the Midwest somewhere. And the guy that bought it was a collector on the East Coast. And then he decided he was going to jump into a different project, threw it up for sale on the EMPI forum. And then I picked it up, and he's actually replacing the heater channels for me. And it just had the motor rebuilt, and I'm going to drive it back. And it's on the Sprint.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's on the Sprint Stars and all that stuff. So it's got Sprint Stars, it's got the rear scoops. It's got the big thing for me was the Riverside wheel, because I think it's such a cool looking wheel, And
yeah.
I've got one of those wheels, and I ended up getting a universal steering wheel. And
that's my favorite. I think that's always been my favorite.
And I picked it up because my friend took it out of this Gia that he had. He's like, I said, what do you do with this wheel? He's like, you can have it. I said, I'll take it, bro. And then I took it because it was a wood rim wheel, had a chrome cap. And then I'm looking at it at home, and I look at the back of it, and it's stamped EMPI on the back. And I'm like,
yeah,
bonus. But, I think my least favorite wheel, and probably people are going to disagree with me, is that coach wheel. I'm not.
The coach wheel?
I've never been a fan of the big rubber.
Well, EMPI never made the coach wheel. So
well, no, but not the coach wheel. Well, it's an EMPI wheel, but it's got the huge center cap on it. It's like a big rubber. It's like an airbag before they had airbags.
Oh, yeah.
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 And so I had one of those, and I traded that wheel to a guy for a set of 40s, and he was super stoked because he got it. And for me, it was just like I wasn't super into it now. And they also made the wheels. They made the GTV wheel, or the GT wheel. They made in a flat also for like Datsuns, because at the time EMPI started doing stuff for
Yep.
Datsun as well.
They made that wheel for either the Datsuns or they made it for the Greenbrier van. The
Corvair.
Corvair Greenbrier van had a flat wheel as well.
Really?
Yeah, they made a wheel for that. I have one of those wheels, NOS, and I had it machined here locally. I'm going to put that in the panel, the 63 panel.
Yeah, that's right. And is it a 14 or 15 inch, or is it 17?
It's not that big. I think the 17 would be the Greenbrier, and you'd have a hard time finding one. I only know of one. That's Richard Roth, who has that wheel.
Yeah.
And I have the smaller one. I have the Datsun one. I have the smaller one. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge to drive the bus with it, but
yeah, no, it's I mean, there's so many things that are collectible. Like, is there anything in the EMPI catalog that, like, did you collect the catalogs as well too?
I still have all of them.
So
including the first one, which is the rarest of all of them.
Is it the first edition, which is what year is that? 58?
1957, 58, and it's this little tiny white print book with the little bubblehead EMPI guy on it. And 90% of the products in there are made by someone else and just rebranded.
Right, like Okrasa and all that.
All the European. It's basically all the European accessories.
Yeah.
But there's some fantastic stuff in that catalog that's in none of the others.
Yeah, I see they've got a banjo wheel in that catalog, and they've got
banjo wheel. And they've got the 356 Porsche headlight bucket inserts that are engine turned in there, selling them as VW.
Oh wow.
Yeah, there's some neat stuff in that catalog. It's my favorite one to this day. Still my favorite one.
Now, is there anything that you always wanted to try to find that you were never able to find, as far as an EMPI product out there that you thought, like, oh man, if I found one of those, that would be super cool?
Can't think of it. I mean, I've had most of it. There was a lot of that stuff that was the later EMPI stuff that was really more kind of, the big chunky fiberglass stuff, like the twin coolers above the back window, and all those big fiberglass scoops and flared fenders. That stuff's pretty rare because you don't see it all the time, but it didn't have much of an appeal for me. I like the earlier cars, and I like the earlier, European style accessories. And, like the EMPI radio was one of my grails that I finally found, an early AM 6-volt AM one.
Now they made the EMPI radio up till the later models. They had an AM FM too.
Yeah, with the black knobs. They made it all the way to the late cars.
Yeah, that's probably a fairly rare thing to run across with the EMPI radios. I just wonder what, I had Resto Johnny on here, and we were talking about some stuff, and we're trying to figure out, like, what was the rarest thing that EMPI made that would be probably some of the most difficult things to find. And we talked about the door panels, like the Hawaiian print door panels.
Yeah.
and those I think would have to be quite rare. I'm actually cruising through one of their catalogs, and it looks like they had a plaid set of seat covers.
Yeah, I'd have to say probably one of the rarest things that I never had them were the front seats, the fiberglass single buckets that were basically the back seat cut apart. If you were to cut the centers, the two seats out of the back seat and make it front seats, those are probably, I've only ever seen a few sets of those, and they're always in someone's car who found us. I've never seen a set for sale. Not to say that they weren't at a swap meet I was at and I just don't remember it. But
right, yeah, I had It's interesting because when I was at the Bug in a couple years ago, and there was a rear seat for sale for $400, and I was like, I should buy it. My brother's like, what do you need that for? I'm like, I don't know. I just think it's cool to have it.
What do you not need it for?
Well, yeah. And then I was like, I'll pass on it. And then I thought that thing would look, because ever since I've been there, since I saw that one that was for sale, I've been back, and I haven't really seen any out there for sale. It seems like the EMPI stuff, you either see tons of it or none of it,
Yeah, they reproduced that back seat for a long time too.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that remade them.
And there's also that's also part of the thing with collecting these things, right? Like trying to make sure you're not buying a piece that's been reproduced, and because now
Yeah.
they even with the flat 4 BRMs, they're like, oh, these are flat 4 BRMs, so they're worth more than the
I,
other
I,
repop
I'm gonna
BRMs.
say if you want to put a value on the reproduction BRMs, I would say the very first ones ever made, which were Java in the UK,
Yeah,
those are probably the ones worth the most. If you're gonna put a value on them, because they were the very first ones to make them before Flat Four even did it.
yeah, and that's Java Johnny up
Yeah.
there. And I ran into him last time I was in the UK and told him, got a commit from him to come on the podcast so we could talk about a bunch of that stuff. But yeah, because he's got a whole story where they came out with a couple lines of wheels and they had a huge trouble and big lawsuits and all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff. So there's definitely an interesting story there, because what happens is, we get into this, even if you look at the hobby as a whole, EMPI today that exists under a name that wasn't legally obtained. You
Right.
know,
Right.
the EMPI, the name and all that stuff was sold from Filter Dynamics. It was sold to Lyle Cherry in Texas, and Lyle Cherry never sold it. And what happened was the sales guy for EMPI saw the name wasn't, they let the corporation expire, whatever they did,
Oh.
and he just went and re-registered it,
How many times has MP changed hands? I mean,
Recently
I,
they've changed hands. Well, they've changed hands. Well, you got to remember, EMPI went out of business. Filter Dynamics bought EMPI and then
right.
shelved it because the Super Beetle came out. They weren't going to develop any more products, and it was just kind of a, let's buy it. This thing's done. Let's get out of here. And I was talking to someone recently, and they were telling me that Joe Vitone told them, look, I'd get out of this EMPI thing now because they're selling pistons now for cheaper than I used to buy them for, And so he saw the writing on the wall with EMPI and unloaded the Filter Dynamics just as the time that the Super Beetle comes out. And then Filter Dynamics, like I said, EMPI was sold to Lyle Cherry, and he just bought it for what reason, I don't know. And then Dan Weldon's father, whose name was Emil, he worked as a salesman for EMPI, and then he owned Mr. Bug, and then he saw that the EMPI name wasn't being utilized and started that up again. So then he ended up, his son had it, and then his son sold it to the big corporation that owns it now. So it's,
Yeah, the last owners of it bought my hood. They actually bought that fiberglass race hood because they were going to build a car.
yeah,
And they also bought, I had the coach wheel, the one that MP didn't make, the 3-spoke coach with the horn ring.
right.
And I had all the horn buttons, every variation of the horn button, including the rarest of them, which was the MP horn button. And mine was like nearly NOS mint. Didn't have a crack, and it was just in pristine condition. It was the one I ran in my MP car for many years.
Right.
They ended up buying it from me, and they told me when they bought the wheel that they were going to reproduce the steering wheel, and that when they did reproduce it, they would give me one of the first copies. So I sold the wheel to them for a reasonable amount of money, and the hood, because they were going to build a car and they wanted to use that original racing hood. But then I heard they dumped everything and sold it.
Yeah. What year was that you sold that?
That was just a few years ago.
Because they were sold, I would say sometime around 2018, maybe just before. So, because I had interviewed the former CEO, which was the new CEO when they got bought by a conglomerate company. So
I have to go look. I still have the check. I cashed the check, but I did it by taking a photo of it and, doing it digitally, depositing it so I could keep the MP check.
and frame
So
it.
a
Yes.
true collector to the very end, right?
Yes, selling EMPI back to EMPI,
Right. It was a big feather in my hat. I was like, I finally sold something back to EMPI.
Right.
So yeah, I still have the check. I'd have to go dig it up and see what the date on it was.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because I wonder who picked that up. Because so you're saying the rarest horn button is a stock replacement button that says EMPI on it?
They make they make the stock button, but instead of having the horseless carriage, it actually has the EMPI globe in the plastic.
Interesting. I think they make that, because I was looking I was looking for a center cap, which I reached out to you earlier this week and just asked if you had a center cap because I have a 14-inch GT wheel that's going in my Type 34, and I just don't have a center cap for it because that wheel came with gauges and all that stuff that was in a car that was dropped off in front of my brother's shop. Like, here, we're just going to scrap this. And he's like, you don't want anything out of it? No, we don't want anything. You don't want the gauges or anything? Like, nope. So I had a full set of EMPI gauges, which I have now in a display case, and then the 14-inch wheel. So, which I don't know how rare the 14-inch wheel is, but I've seen one person advertise it as unbelievably rare, but I mean, I guess it's all relevant, or relative to their production numbers. And that's the interesting part too. Like, how can you track down any of this production information? Like how many units they actually made?
Yeah. I mean, right now, I think the person you'd have to, the only person that has more stuff than anybody is probably Danny Zepeda currently.
Yeah.
Because he ran into the one guy and he bought out that one guy's, and the guy was, the designer guy or whoever who worked for EMPI, and he bought out that guy's entire personal collection, and he probably has more of the non-sold items, paperwork stuff and office stuff. Right. He probably has more of that than anybody.
Yeah, no, I definitely I've got to track him down because I definitely like to get the story on that and see, because there's so many of these little people. I don't want to say little, but like people that were involved to some degree with EMPI that maybe have kept things or keepsakes or what have you. And, out of nowhere, it's like you see Danny ends up with all this stuff and like original prototype drawings and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So there's definitely tons going on in the hobby. And just when you think it's kind of gone its way, there's something else, so.
I think it's interesting too, how like when the collecting of EMPI stuff in 60s speed, 70s speed kind of started slowing down and kind of wavering here, it picked up overseas. Yeah. In like France and Belgium and in the UK, and it kind of does cycles, it's kind of interesting because we move on, and then maybe it's just like California starts the trends and it takes a while to get to the East Coast. Maybe that's what we're doing, is the trends just take a while to get over there. And by the time they're doing it, we've moved on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to try to figure out where the hobby goes next, because just when you thought, $1,000 set of wheels was crazy money, then you see people spending $3,500 for a set of those SA Sprint Stars.
Oh, I'll tell you a wheel story if you like rare wheels. So back in the 90s, I had purchased from Matt Howard a 1957 oval window bug, had 36,000 original miles. It was basically a one-owner car. 100% original, with all the paperwork from the dealer. Every receipt for every single thing that was ever bought for the car came with the car.
Wow.
He got it for payment on painting a bus to match a guy's motorhome. The guy towed behind his motorhome. And eventually Matt moved on and wanted to buy something else, and I bought the bug from him. This was when we got back from Camberg around 2000. Yeah. I bought the bug from him because we had come back from Camberg, and so I bought the bug from him and proceeded to collect rarest of all the accessories I could find out of Europe and put on the car, on the oval, and keep it still tasteful. And I came across, and these were in Ohio, I came across a set of the most bizarre wheels you've ever seen for a fit of VW. They were Kelsey Hayes radial spoked wheels, which, I don't know if you don't know what radial spokes are, but radial spokes are straight spokes. They don't crisscross each other.
Right.
So it's multiple layers of spokes, but they're all straight. There's they're offset, but there's like, two rows or three rows of spokes that are all offset, but they don't crisscross each other. They all just go straight.
I think I know what you're talking about. I think it's like a cast aluminum center and a steel hoop.
Yes. So these are Kelsey Hayes, mm-hmm. and they're spoked, but then they have a Rudge knockoff back plate that's got teeth all the way around that fit into the back of the rim like a puzzle. So they're knockoff rims. So you bolt this hub onto the brake drum with all these teeth and then the center spine, and then the wheel slides over, and then you use a knockoff hammer to spin the knockoff on and tighten it down to hold the wheel on. And I bought these things for $3,500, and I ended up, you had to have tubes because they were spoked. I ended up finding at one of the Pomonas, somebody in the V8 section had a set of these new old stock vintage bias ply racing tires that were, I can't even remember the name on them now. It's so long ago, like Goodyear Racing something, tire. And they were raised white leather, real narrow, 15 by 3.5 or something. They were crazy looking race tires.
Yeah.
I put them on these spoked rims, and I put them on that oval window. And the first thing I thought to myself is, man, this looks like kind of like lowridery.
Right.
It doesn't really look good on the car at all. And they were rare, so I left them on the car and went to a lot of shows and showed the car. But eventually, I took them off the car and I sold them to Eric Meyer, who you probably might remember owned Simple Shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been on the podcast. He's probably 10 episodes ago.
So he had a 356
Continental
Pre-A,
uh-huh.
and he put them on the Pre-A, and they looked like they belonged on that car. Well, come to find out, 20 years later, we find a photo in a magazine, a racing magazine. We find a photo of 356 Porsches racing with those wheels on them, and that's what they were. They were like a variation of a Rudge racing wheel, but with Kelsey Hayes wires. Really interesting, super rare, probably worth several times more than real BRMs.
Yeah, that's insane.
Probably $20,000 wheels, $30,000 set of wheels, and I bought them for $3,500 a million years ago, not knowing what they were or anything.
Yeah, I happen to be going through an old Hot VWs magazine, and I'm in the back page, and there's that car from the 80s that was this wild car that had it was all gold leaf painted, stolen a couple times. What was the name of it? It was called, it was named after a movie Tom Cruise is in. And it was like, Top Gun is the name of the car. And there's a picture of a body kit similar to that for sale in the back of the magazine. And it's like a Baja, this funky curved fiberglass Baja thing. And it's got a set of these Kelsey Hayes wheels on there, but they're called strippers. And it's a cast aluminum center that's riveted to a steel hoop, and they're a 5-lug wheel, 15.6 by 5 lug, and it's just a really wild pattern, and they're just straight spokes coming in and out at different angles. And I looked at those wheels and I thought, oh man, just out of nowhere, I saw these and I thought, those are super unique looking. Those would look cool in a car. And then I started going down the rabbit hole of trying to find those wheels. And anytime there's something that's made really weird, like a 2-piece wheel or something like that, or, even with the BRMs, being made magnesium, a lot of times they're very rare. Most people at the time that they come out, they want nothing to do with them. And either because they don't fit the style and the time, which I think limits the production and makes them go for more money later because not a lot of people bought them,
Yeah.
I mean, the first wheel that comes to mind when I think about that, talking about that, is the 5-lug, the 5x130 Cosmic. Is compared to the Fuke, it is not a good looking wheel. What makes that wheel good looking is knowing how rare that wheel is. Well, now that they reproduce that and the 4-lug ones. It's kind of like you've seen it, and that's the thing in the hobby, right? What makes things stand out and look so different is that they're very rare and unique. And sometimes when you get, when they start reproducing things, it then takes the thrill of having a set of
originals. Right. Yeah. I just recently saw, you probably remember back when I got into VWs, mini trucks were a big deal at the same time.
Yep.
And, remember the teddy bear wheels?
I do.
They just started reproducing those, I saw the other day, and I was like, are you freaking kidding me?
And they're unbelievably expensive. You can find an original set. And we used to, what's funny.
I believe it. Is
back in the 80s, you thought those wheels were like a joke. It was like the late 80s.
Yeah, they were the dumbest wheels I ever saw.
Yeah, and the teddy bears go for some big money right now. It's wild.
I've started seeing mini trucks again, here, under construction trucks. I haven't seen anything like finished, but I've seen 2 or 3 driving around. It's like somebody's getting into them again.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna lie that maybe on my lot next door I've got a Nissan 720 King Cab and a 92 GMC Blazer, mini Blazer, so and a set of IROC wheels. So, it's one of those things where it's like the things we couldn't have when we were younger, they're so
Right.
I mean, I've got this
Right.
Nissan hard body. It's not a hard body, sorry, it's a 720. It was for sale for $1,000, and I drove it home. The next day I'm on Marketplace, and I buy a set of like the Champ 500 style wheels. They're like the 5-hole inky that were the typical mini truck deep dish wheel. I find a set of wheels and tires for $500, and it's like, put them on there. Car's already lowered, and it's like instant mini truck, like something that would have been like a kid's 2-year project. I do for $1,500 and in 3 days.
Right.
It's crazy because it's all, and as it's all affordable now, it will soon not be affordable because people are thinking like, oh, it's cheap, let's get it. And then people just start, because it's like just, $1,500. It's
Well,
like,
we'll see it. We'll see it in the next issue of Haggerty
right.
magazine, where they're talking about the trends.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy.
Speaking of trends, I mean, the Mark One and Mark Two rabbits have become the new Beetle.
They are.
The from when we're growing up, what bugs were to us, those Mark One and Mark Two rabbits have become the Beetle for this next generation of
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. They actually, and and the Mark ones they refer to as the swallowtail, and they have all
Yeah.
kinds of insight, and, as detailed as we got in these, and it's happening to that little bit younger generation than us. But what's wild is I did a podcast with a guy, Don Weir, who sells a bunch of literature online. And I was wanting to do some deep dive info on late model stuff, just like Super Beetles, that kind of stuff, just to get catalogs. And he had one of everything. So I called him up, made a package deal, chatting with him on the phone. He's in his 80s. And I said, how'd you get all these things? He goes, I worked at the dealership. I was the first employee in York, PA at the dealership here. And I used to make $35 when I sold a bug. It's a great podcast. You got to listen to it. It's Don Weir, Life of a VW Sales Guy. And in the 70s, as they were pitching all of the sales literature, he would get it out of the trash and take it home. And he just
Oh
has,
my God.
and he has cases of rabbit literature, like
Ah.
the catalogs, like brand new. And he's like, here's a case, 25 cents a piece. There's 100 of them in here. So $25 you get.
I got a similar story, actually. This is funny you bringing this up, and I'm glad you kind of did, because it's something fun that I don't tell a lot of people about.
Yeah.
So when I was just at the end of high school, getting out of high school, I went to work for our local Volkswagen dealership. I worked at used to be called Demas VW and eventually became Linda Brock
Yeah.
Volkswagen. I worked for Linda Brock from about 86 to almost 96, real close to that. I worked there for a good almost 10 years. And I did every job possible there practically. I started there by washing cars, and I was the courtesy shuttle driver. And eventually I worked in parts, shipping, receiving for a while, and so I did a little of everything there. I eventually I tried to become a lube tech, but I eventually got hired in as a service writer. And then Chapman bought the dealer from Linda Brock, and then of course they came in, and we all lost our jobs within a few days. Everybody who worked there had been replaced with Chapman people.
Right.
So when I worked there, one of the things that we would do was, and you got to remember this is in the late 80s, early 90s.
Uh-huh.
Me and Bill Bailey, he worked there as well. Me and Bill Bailey would spend our lunch hours and our free time on the microfilm machines, looking up vintage parts and typing them into the computer to see if there was any still available. I think we cleaned VW out in all their warehouses. I think we cleaned out all of the NOS Type 3 owner's manuals they still had in stock over a period of a year.
Really?
And Type 3 running lights. You could still get them even up into the early 90s right from VW, and in the gaskets for them as well. And that was just some of the stuff. I mean, there was tons of early VW parts and hardware and little pieces here and there, and we were ordering it as much as we could afford with each paycheck to buy it from Volkswagen and having it shipped directly to us at work.
That's insane. I mean, and what's funny is there was always the dealerships. There was always like, I remember there was a guy who worked at the Godin Porsche place here. He was a parts guy, and he goes, hey, do you like those phone dial wheels? I'm like, yeah, they're all right. He's like, dude, I can buy them in the thing. They're $80 each. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, like, I don't know if it was some kind of glitch or there was overstock or something, but it's like $80 for a wheel, a brand new phone dial. And so
Yeah.
I snatched up a set. But I mean, it's insane how sometimes on these dealerships, things just get lost in the shuffle or, put on
Well,
blowout and close out.
they came a lot of times stuff would come up no longer available, NLR, and no longer available, or NLA. And what you would do is you would do a call the warehouse, and you would say, hey, these are coming up NLA, can you see if there's any dead stock? And they would still have stuff on the shelf even though it wasn't listed available any longer.
Yeah.
And that's we would get a lot of stuff that way.
No, that's I mean,
So,
there's so many variations of so many cool things in the aftermarket of the hobby, especially for one model of car that had
yeah.
100 different manufacturers make things for them.
I remember at one point Bill had, Bill was relentless too about looking stuff up. And I remember at one point he found carpet kits in all different colors for VW Bug through the dealer. They were made by a third party, not by VW, but they were sold through the dealerships. And he found them, and there was something like 300 sets of carpet kits and seat cover sets. And we bought them all.
Wow.
All of them. And I remember loading the single cab multiple times, coming home with the single cab just overflowing with these boxes full of like colored carpet. Every swap meet, if you came by us, we would have carpet kits and seat cover sets for every model of air-cooled VW, every year possible. I mean, we had them all.
That's nuts, man. It's just crazy that stuff like that would be available, and then to think what they'd be worth today.
Yeah, today. I mean, this was all in the 90s, and we sold all this stuff back then.
Yeah, that's wild, man. Well, cool. Well, I'm glad we got to chat, man, and just kind of catch up on
Absolutely.
on some of the stuff. And in the future, when you get your camper bus done, man, let's do a deep dive on that, dude, on the process and everything you had to go through and what it took to get that thing restored to
the hardest restoration I think anyone could ever take on is an old vintage camper, because VW made the bus, but Westphalia made the interior, and then everybody on the planet made parts for that, for that interior. And it's like the hardest restoration. It's like doing 2 or 3 restorations, in one vehicle. It's the hardest thing the most expensive restoration you'll ever take on.
Oh, I can only imagine. And that's why one of those things where, I was telling somebody, I said, if you buy a car, all you can do is hope you buy it as complete as possible, because especially if it's a really rare car.
I tell everybody that. I said, spend more money and buy a complete driving one. I know it seems crazy to pay twice for something, but I go, in the long run, you'll be able to enjoy it immediately, and it'll cost you less time and less money over a long period, because you won't be chasing parts for the rest of your life.
No question about that. Well, cool, man. So I'm glad we had to get you on the podcast. Anybody wants to get in touch with you, they can reach out to you. Are you on Instagram, Facebook, or?
I'm on I'm on Facebook as my name. I've got multiple pages. I also have Second Avenue Scooters on both Facebook and Instagram. Okay. I'm at Second Avenue Scooters on Instagram. I also have I have a little art project business called The Witch Doctor's Den. Mm-hmm. We have that's at The Witch Doctor's Den on Instagram, and nice. I have the Witch Doctor's Den page on Facebook as well. And that's my little side business art project.
Now, business. Now, what does that entail? Is that the? Because I saw you doing something with tiki stuff, right? Like tiki lounge.
Yeah,
stuff?
We're really big into getting a little older, slowing down a little bit, getting into tiki. Really enjoy the real it's kind of, if you're into buses, it's kind of the same kind of vibe, that kind of relaxing, cocktails and surf music kind of thing. And I make tiki lamps, like bar lamps, and I chased down a mid-century artist's work that was discontinued in 1969, and I bought copyright license to reproduce his art and sell his art.
Wow.
So I got a hold of his family and got permission through his family and through the actual owner of the copyright, who wasn't his family. And I've been, reissuing his prints that were printed between 66 and 69. And we make novelty purses. They're wicker puffer fish.
Oh, very cool.
Currently, yeah, we're working on some newer designs for next year, but we make these purses kind of fun for all the girls who are into the vintage clothing and the pinup look, and they get to have these fun little purses we make.
Wow, there's plenty of listeners that are into that too. So what's the Instagram for that one?
Instagram's at Witch Doctor's Den.
Oh, very cool, man.
Yeah, the Shopify page is thewitchdoctorsden.com.
Well, cool, man. Well, I'm glad we got to finally sit down and do this. I've been wanting to do it for a while, so I look forward to it. And thanks for coming on, man.
Happy to share. I spent a lot of my life chasing this stuff, out of passion. It was really for passion.
Well, and that's what it comes down to. I mean, that's what the whole hobby's about, is just, you're just really into something, and it's so exciting to pursue something that was part of history that people forgot about. You know? And to bring that stuff to light, and then to find other people that can appreciate that same history of days gone by is something cool too.
Yeah. Sometime if you want, we could dive deeper into some of the back east, all the junkyards, and I've got stories about cars that, rarest of the rare cars found in junkyards that were absolutely unrestorable.
No, absolutely.
356 Carrera Porsches and 550 Spiders, and cars that don't exist, and we found them, but they were so far gone.
That's crazy. Well, we'll have to circle back and do one, man, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, Eric, I can't thank you enough, man.
You're very welcome. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share.
You got it. Cool. Well, hopefully you guys learned a lot and you enjoyed that podcast, because I certainly did. And if you enjoyed this podcast, think about sharing it with some of your friends. Send it to your VW groups. Connect all your VW friends with this podcast, the greatest VW podcast that's out on the market. There's other ones coming out, and we're going to be talking about those coming up. And we're going to share those because we love when other people bring more VW content out there for our listeners. We don't get jelly. We just work harder. So looking forward to that. And if I see you guys at Buses by the Bridge, I may be there next week. So don't forget Lake Havasu, London Bridge Beach next weekend. And until next week, guys, later.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen. It's got everything that people who like the bug like.